By starting session 6, it means that we have finished over 25% of the work that we are doing with our client. And it's a good time to remind the specialist to keep the client focused on their vision and the big picture. Because even though there is a lot of structure being built into the client's lifestyle, it's important to not lose sight of the details from past sessions. So now we will shift gears to talk a bit about dining out. So now reflect on the session tied to obstacles and barriers, because for some, dining out can be something that gets in the way of reaching their goal. We also want to provide support for our client when they present us with a particular concern for their dining out challenges, so that we are again reminded that our job description includes problem solving on many fronts. So you might find that as you do weekly sessions with your client, other problems and scenarios need to be resolved. It could be something like physical activity or perspective shifts related to their new eating patterns. But one common barrier for most of our clients is the fact that a lot of people are working sometimes 10 or more hours a day, and a lot of times proper planning is required for your client if they're going to stay on a plan, specifically when faced with the options of fast and convenient foods. Foods that are convenient and easily accessible can be attractive options for a busy client, so we need to be able to help our client who is learning to master a new eating pattern plan as part of this program and address this during session 6. You might find that some of your clients are a little inconsistent due to eating out frequently at work or even in social settings. Whatever the reason, it's good for you to just accept that your client will dine out from time to time, but then we need to provide them with some tools so that they can do it properly, and that's what session 6 is all about. Technology and the internet specifically mean that Nesta can train specialists delivering the HEED program in all parts of the world, but we want to emphasize the fact that our reference materials used have typically been drawn from North American statistics and studies. With that in mind, realize that approximately 76% of Americans indicate that they will normally eat out at a restaurant once a week on average. 40% of Americans report eating out 3 or more times a week. So it is safe to say that, at least in the United States, the overall frequency of dining out has increased. Unfortunately, meals that are eaten away from home tend to have more saturated fat than what we would see in foods that are prepared and consumed at home, and this is a trend in many developed Western countries. This means that it might be more work for your client to find healthier choices when they do eat out, but what it also means is that we have a role to fulfill in helping our client to get through these situations in a positive way that doesn't sideline their success in the program or make them feel deprived. Before you start session 6, you should prepare by going into it with the knowledge that your client will be forced to consume foods outside of their home environment, and therefore dining out is something that we will have to deal with. One strategy that you can use as part of the HEED program is called defensive dining. Now, by this point, you really need to have an understanding of your client's eating habits in general to be able to lead your client, and you also should have learned what you need from the assessments and screens done in earlier sessions in order to set up your conversations with each client with clarity and to be able to focus prior to meeting with them. So there may be a little bit of homework involved. You will also need to know the typical style of eating for the client and what challenges they may face. Session 6 is an appropriate time for you to step into this particular topic with your client. Start out by trying to figure out what kind of diner your client is. Now, if your client is able to agree with statements like, "I don't mind paying a little bit more for a healthier meal," or they are willing to travel across town for a greater restaurant experience, then this would be a diner that we would classify or categorize as a special occasion diner. On the other hand, you might have a client that is likely to say, "I want food that tastes good but is not too expensive, and I want to handle meals quickly, so I prefer to go to restaurants or convenience stores because time is tight." Other clients might travel or spend a lot of time on the road or feel forced to eat fast food. These would all be the traits of a necessity diner. Knowing the differences in dining styles mean that you will understand your client better and the potential risks or behaviors that require coaching. An example you could try is coaching your client to eat at a slower pace and to not do the bite and swallow method when they eat. Explain the benefits of any coaching suggestions that you provide to the client. In this example, slower eating has multiple benefits and they are obvious, but may not be to your client. It's conceivable that you might face situations where your client really doesn't know how to find healthy food choices, or they may not know a lot about nutrition and they lack direction. And this type of client might need to know recommendations or suggestions for sources of healthy food options like local restaurants or even a farmer's market. Anything we do that can help our client to plan ahead is useful coaching. In past sessions, we have already taught our client about nutrient-dense foods and how to avoid refined foods and starchy carbohydrates, and this is meant to inform clients so that they can make healthier choices no matter what environment they find themselves in. Another useful or helpful strategy that you can try is to have your client make menu selections before they dine out, and this is just one benefit from restaurants that post their menus online. So have your client commit to specific items and instruct them to incorporate these items into their food logs for later review. This type of planning will help the client from falling into temptations when they are in restaurants and see desserts on display or large T-bone steaks being served. If the client doesn't have a plan when faced with these triggers, it could become a problem for them. Now, we've described two different types of diners that you will most likely see and are largely defined by the traits or characteristics of the client's preferences when mealtime comes around. Your suggestions and recommendations will then be based on knowing what kind of diner the client is. So the goal becomes one where we allow our client some flexibility while also keeping them on track. Part of your ability to being effective means that you have to know your client well enough to make useful suggestions. This is your way of personalizing an eating plan for your client, and this individualized coaching allows your client to maybe even have components of both types of dining styles while still being compliant with their food choices. Therefore, we want to provide specific recommendations like opting for tomato-based sauces instead of cream sauces, or for broiled or baked items instead of fried foods. Another idea to suggest is to order items a la carte. If, after knowing your client's behaviors, you're able to come up with other tips for success, then of course we would ask permission from the client to share these before we do so. Now, if your client shows that they are more of a necessity diner, then they would most likely agree with statements like they have to eat out in order to be able to eat at all. Some clients are necessity diners because they don't like to cook, or they don't like to shop for food, or they prefer to not prepare meals at home. It could also be a combination of all three. A lot of your clients that fit this description are those with active careers or families that both influence and define their eating style. After determining that your client might be a necessity diner, one appropriate strategy that you could try is the adapt and avoid method that we've learned about before. Again, considering both styles of dining, if your client is a necessity diner, do what you can to convince them or persuade them to stop eating out and to start incorporating healthier options into their daily routines if they do eat out a lot. Some strategies include preparing more food at home and to prepare healthy meals for them to take to work. Suggest involving family members in meal planning and preparation. Even though your client might still need to eat out at times, we can still try to coach them on making healthier choices when they're forced to dine out of necessity. Next up, we will talk about fast food. And now we all eat fast food and it's not really a big deal. But with that said, we need to understand that there are some good and some not so good options in addition to some positives and negatives that are associated with eating fast food. One positive factor is that fast food can be convenient and it can resolve hunger for a busy client. Another positive factor is that fast food restaurants now show a willingness to offer healthier options and to provide the consumer, or your client in this case, the relevant nutritional information for the food that they are serving. Total calories and macronutrient information provides the client an increased edge on understanding what they're eating, as it helps them bridge the gap of understanding food intake overall. With good coaching, your client can learn how to make good fast food items fit within their eating patterns and their HEAT goals. Some of these more positive factors are obvious benefits because they help our client to stay on track, shows flexibility, and also gives them informed choices. Still, we need to emphasize to our client that ultimately they are the ones responsible for the food choices that they make when they are dining in a fast food environment. Reflecting back on times when I functioned as a corporate wellness coach and trainer, I was always aware of the challenges before workers who sometimes struggle to get lunch or healthy meals on the go. As a result, they might visit vending machines or convenience stores that they either work at, serve, or deliver to as part of their workday. So it's important that we both accept and know that we have clients that may be faced with these similar scenarios. It's also important that we recognize our responsibility in being able to redirect our client to understand that healthy choices can be made when they find themselves at convenience stores or when they find that they have to pull their lunch from a vending machine. Luckily, by now your client has had some or maybe enough information to help them better understand some of the choices that are preferred to keep them on track and within their eating plan. This could include swapping out whole milk for skim or fat-free varieties, soy alternatives, foods that might be lower on the glycemic index such as graham crackers, or opting for fresh fruit or yogurt, and of course water. A lot of foods sold in convenience stores are actually allowed in the HEAD program, and these could become realistic options for your client. Encourage your client to be mindful of their eating plan when making selections from fast food restaurants or convenience stores so that they can comply with their eating plan needs for that particular day. It's also helpful to remember and know that vending machines and convenience stores are stocked with healthier options that will even go as far as labeling with stickers to indicate healthy selections. It's not unusual to see vending machines stocked with pretzels, nuts, or dried fruits, and these foods can fit pretty easily into your client's eating plans if they are consumed in the right portions. This sort of plan might be different than what your client is used to, so encourage some flexibility in the client's thinking here because it will help to curb hunger while allowing them to stay on plan. By the time you have finished session 6 with your client, they should have strategies for finding good food choices away from home, and that the quality of these selections should not suffer just because they have time constraints during their busy day. Let's review session 6. At this point, make sure that you have spoken to your client about what kind of eating habits they normally engage in, and remember that this will help you to determine if you're working with a special occasions diner or a necessity diner. And this type of information is important because it will help you to be able to make recommendations, suggestions, and strategies that will help your client stay compliant during weekly sessions. Question your client to assess their understanding of your expectations. Does your client know what they can do if they were to walk into a restaurant full of triggers? Try to be prepared to share information and strategize for any of the changes in the eating plans that you develop between now and the next session. Take 1 or 2 items from the client's food logs to do this and suggest or recommend improvements for better options that the client could choose. This might include suggesting meals made at home or reminding the client to avoid fried foods from fast food restaurants and to then choose broiled options instead. The suggestions that you make will be based on the information that you see in your client's food logs. So also be sure that you positively reinforce any good information that you see in your client's food or activity logs before wrapping up session 6.